put them on notice and said, hey, if you get in the way of law enforcement officers, you're going to be breaking the law. And so she's already put them on notice. But the only apparatus out there right now that can stop President Trump and Elon Musk and what they're doing is Tish James, Alvin Bragg, and the Soros-backed apparatus with these Upper West Side juries and this kind of compliant New York City liberal media. And it's a danger, big danger.
So in this article, it says that after the hearing that you called on Attorney General Pam Bondi to prosecute New York Attorney General Letitia James and investigate Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, both of whom brought successful cases against Trump. Now, Letitia James, she lied and said she didn't campaign on prosecuting Trump. And of course, I showed the video on the show where she did repeatedly said she was going to prosecute Trump. And so that made it a political prosecution, which 100% was. Alvin Bragg, Cuomo was on Bill Maher and said that this would not have been brought. This is the case that should not have been brought against Donald Trump. He would have never brought it. It should have never been brought. Even Cuomo said that, right? And so you said Letitia James is an existential threat to the Trump administration.
Yes.
So right now, so you're saying, so you did ask Pam Bondi to do this, and she's already doing it?
Well, let me say, I didn't ask. And by the way, I signed yesterday the lowest level felony for intent to do it. Not actually do it, but in the intent, conspiracy to do it, a conspiracy charge. Okay. And I signed what I signed, and I stand by that. But when I had the deal offered of absolutely nothing, no restitution, the reason there's no restitution, they used to have up when she came, Letitia James, because she's never quite great about the facts, she and Bragg accused me of stealing $22 million from hundreds of people in Manhattan, right? And that even the charging document didn't say I actually stole a penny. There was no dollar amount in there because I didn't. But this is how they come at you and how they use the media against you. So I did sign it. But like my lawyer said, he's been doing this a long time. He's never seen a situation where they essentially say it's going to be there's going to be impossible to convict you, but they'll grind you. And this is what they do. The feds or the locals, if you're working with Trump, they come after you. People got to understand, they will bankrupt you. They will put you in bankruptcy. Hey, this thing right here on these trials, and I've already spent millions of dollars to get to this point, to do a trial is $1 million to $2 million a roll. And if you get a hung jury, right, which is the best you're going to get, you're just not going to get acquitted. Because they pick these juries in the Upper West Side. Look at the Trump. Trump got 32 of these bizarre, the bizarre felonies on top of whatever the misdemeanors were. It was, bizarre. And it took them a couple hours. You're never going to get a fair trial in New York. They've got a perfect system up there. And so I'm warning people, don't think that your big threats to these federal courts. I think today when the judge ruled on one of the more controversial, which is about the buyouts, he said, hey, look, buyouts look like they're okay, going to proceed. I think all of these federal court things that they're doing right now, I think that they will all either be overturned at appellate court or even have to go to the Supreme Court, maybe on the impoundment. But I think the threat to Trump is the Soros-backed apparatus in New York City. And what they're going to claim is, remember, the trading desk of the Treasury Department, the trading desk of the Fed are the two biggest trading desks in New York City, bigger than Salomon Brothers or Goldman Sachs. Every piece of commercial data goes there. Every piece of trade data goes through there, all financing transactions. So they can claim a broad, hey, the stuff's coming through here, particularly some of the stuff Doge is doing, right, on some of the information Doge is getting. So I'm just warning the guys, don't think that Letitia James and Bragg and this team they've got around them, particularly Soros-backed, is not thinking about this. They are thinking about this. And I called on Pam Bondi, one, to do the criminal investigation that goes back to Trump's trial and when they had Matthew Colangelo and all these guys from Maine Justice go up there and help them. That should be done. But I also think they got to look into the situation of the current deconstruction of the administrative state and the destruction of the deep state, because I believe that Tish James is going to stick her nose right in the middle of this, and then you're going to have a fight. And remember, when it's in a state court, she controls, not you. She controls. So it's something I think is very concerning.
All right, we'll keep our eye on that. It's remarkable what they're doing in New York and what they did in D.C. But everybody, when I told people that you were coming on the show, everybody wanted me to ask you about this documentary on Epstein that where you said you were working on it and you had 15 hours of interviews with him, but it never got released. What happened to it?
I haven't finished it. So hopefully it's going to be a multi-part. I would hope a Netflix or something like this. It's really going to show. It's called the working title is called The Monster. He's a product of the elite. Everything I think has been put out about him is not exactly the truth. Now, hopefully, they're going to release all this information they've got. I think Pam Bondi has it, or the intelligence community has it. They should be releasing, or Christy Nome has it, whether the flight logs are, all those things. So I've got about 12 hours of interviews with him, 12 to 15 hours of interviews that I think will be pretty shocking about how this guy came from nowhere. Because I think he's born in like Coney Island, how he came from nowhere to go to the absolute highest levels of global elite, right? And who he knew and who he financed. He's one of the leading underwriters of scientific experiments in the world, and a lot of that's dealing with this thing called transhumanism. So I think it's if I ever get it done, or when I get it done, it's going to be quite fascinating. But it's a project I'm working on with my filmmaking team.
And so are you surprised there hasn't been a bigger call for an investigation into his death? Because nobody believes he killed himself, but that's what the government tells us.
Oh, I think he was murdered. I don't think there's any doubt.
And
I think his attorneys think he definitely was murdered, and these guys are pretty steady guys. I don't think there's any doubt he was taken out. To me, personally, I don't think there's any doubt he was taken out. I think he was murdered or executed, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
I have no belief that he killed himself.
So do you think Trump's going to want to get to the bottom of that? What happened? I mean, it was obvious they just let him be executed. You know, they sent a guy in and they killed him in prison. And so what do you think Trump's going to want to? I mean, we need someone in power to try to find out what happened, right?
Well, Pam Bondi, first off, BOP is something I'm helping since I was a convict already on a misdemeanor. Spent 4 months. I'm working with Jared and Peter Navarro and the others that were jailed or in prison in President Trump's time. We're working on getting new Bureau of Prison leadership. Hopefully reformers, and not hopefully, we'll get reformers. The thing has to be reformed. The jail or the prison where he was held temporarily in New York was a known the hellhole, and with horrible people running it, etc. Filthy. People should not have to be treated like animals. Although he was not a good guy, very bad guy, but you still a human being. You got to treat him like human beings. It was terrible. But I have no belief. There's zero probability that he killed himself. I think he was executed. And remember, Bill Barr ran the Justice Department. You had a bunch of holdovers and careerists running the BOP. I just think it's got to be investigated. Yeah, I think President Trump will, or I think Bureau of Prisons will. Pam Bondi and other people they're going to be associated. I think they'll turn over and start to have a major investigation, which I think they have to. They've already said that they had some sort of investigation into it, but I don't believe it.
So now I remember hearing you talk about that these tech guys want some kind of Venetian city-state system of technocratic feudalism.
Well, I don't say that. They say that. That's they called the network state. Scott Bellagio, I think, is the theoretician. One of Peter Thiel's guys is the theoretician of this, called the network state.
So
that's their belief.
So did you know that it turns out by coincidence that the word Doge is actually the title for the ruler of the Venetian city-state?
Yes.
Who used the Doge system from about the 8th to the 18th century. So for about 1,000 years. And this is from Wikipedia. The Doge of Venice acted as both the head of state and head of the Venetian oligarchy. Doges were elected for life through a complex voting process. So my question is, how worried should I be about that?
Well, I think you should be very worried. There's a couple of great books on this. There's the former Greek, I cannot pronounce his last name, but he wrote a book called Techno-Feudalism that's quite revelatory. But there's a lot of work out there now that people are doing this. I think you should be worried because they're not thinking on the spectrum of kind of, Rachel Maddow on the left and Bannon and these other crazies on the right, and populist nationalists versus progressives, whether you're open borders or more sovereigntists. You're kind of on a spectrum and you argue about that, and it's kind of been passed down from the ages. These guys really think on a different spectrum, a different line, and that is, it's really techno-feudalism. It's this thing of kind of a network state that you would have, instead of thinking in capitalist terms of markets and profits, they would think as digital platforms and rent seekers. And so and this is why you have no competition. You have Facebook and Google and Twitter and Amazon and these things that really have no competition. You have 50 or 60 or 70 electric vehicle companies. You don't have any real competition to Google, unless you consider DuckDuckGo, which is quite tiny.
Right. It's
across the board like that. And remember, they've had the progressive kind of sociopathic overlords of Wall Street and the political class of Washington, D.C. created these oligarchs who were all progressive Democrats. And it was fine. They kind of made a pact with them, an agreement that since we're a hegemon politically and geopolitically, they would make a Faustian bargain to essentially allow these people to become the richest people in the world, have no antitrust around them, no breakups, no real regulatory control, very de minimis regulatory control, and allow them to become the richest, most powerful people in the world. But the Faustian bargain was that you have to take the commanding heights in the age of the algorithm. In the algorithmic age, you have to make sure that the hegemon has the commanding heights. And we've seen in the last couple of weeks that, hey, the bargain didn't become true. That number one, TikTok is so much more sophisticated, because the two things are social media and artificial intelligence. TikTok's so much more sophisticated than what we've come up with, which is kind of still fairly rudimentary. That the Chinese Communist Party won't even allow the real version of it that's infecting the West to be in mainland China. And then you see artificial intelligence, and whether it was a Chinese PSYOP or Sputnik moment, the difference between DeepSeek and Chat GPT, or our AI version in the West, which is kind of brute force computing, to the fact that you need these massive power centers to power the data centers, and to that net carbon zero and the green and the Green New Deal is kind of gone by the wayside. They don't talk about it anymore because you need 10 times more power than what powers the United States right now. So they would need sustainable, baseload power. They don't need wind every now and again and solar. They need real power, whether it's nuclear, coal, whatever. And so, and turns out that theory, if DeepSeek is correct, that theory of kind of this brute force just computing for artificial intelligence may be the wrong path. It may be a Sputnik moment. And what did they do? They do exactly what happened in the 2008 financial collapse. In the 2008 financial collapse, which was not Obama's fault. He came in after it, but they went to, Geithner and these guys around Obama, and it was a classic bailout. They took the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve from $880 billion to about $4.5 trillion. That infusion of liquidity propped up the real assets, real estate, and stocks and hedge funds, so the system wouldn't collapse. But it was all that was paid for by middle class people. The taxpayer didn't get warrants, didn't get options, didn't get on the rebound, didn't get real assets. They got nothing. In fact, they took it to zero interest rates. So the little guy's checkbook and his savings account had no interest for years and years and years and years and years. And they knew they were doing this when they did this. There's a book called Lords of Easy Money that talked about the Federal Reserve. The president of the Dallas Federal Reserve argued and said the working class and middle class are going to get destroyed by doing this. And the guys kind of want to tell me, yeah, you're right, but we'll save the system. At the same time, they make this deal with Silicon Valley. And so now these guys come down here at this Sputnik moment, and what's the first thing they do? They turn around and say, we need a bailout. We need a Mercury program, or we need a Marshall Plan. We need $500 billion. We need $1 trillion of government money. We need all the national labs, all the weapons labs, Lawrence Livermore, Sandia. We need them all turned around to artificial intelligence to fuel us that we can live with it. Another bailout. And so now we're in a terrible situation. We're jammed because you're sitting there and you go, you should have Justice Department. You should have the Lena Khans, and they've got some great people coming in and Trump's, Gail Slater, Andrew Ferguson, some real, trust busters to go after them. You should go after these guys right now to break them all up. I don't mean marginal. I mean to break them up and let 1,000 flowers bloom in competition. You can't do that because now they're arguing, hey, we need national champions because now the Chinese Communist Party is ahead of us. Oh, by the way, we need $500 billion. And all the safeguards you're worried about, Bannon, and you got you Luddites and Jimmy Dore, you can't worry about artificial intelligence because we've got to do all metal, no gas, because the Chinese Communist Party could have weapon systems made by artificial general intelligence, which is really machines teaching machines how to think. And now we're screwed, and we have to kind of step back and let them concentrate further, give them more money to get into a race that now an artificial intelligence arms race where we're going to have very little control over this thing. So we're in a terrible, terrible situation with oligarchs.
So you agree that this concentration of power is a horrible thing, but we're in such a bad place we have to let it concentrate even more.
Well, I think we'd have to. I'm called a neo-Brandeisian, I guess it's pronounced, or Brandeisian after Louis Brandeis. There's two schools of thought in kind of antitrust. One is that the people that are most concerned about concentrations of private power teaming with government power, kind of the Chinese Communist Party model, which is really a form of state capitalism. And that it goes after, I guess Louis Brandeis, and it's called neo-Brandeisians. Lena Khan was one, and she had no support, no support by Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or the Biden administration. I think she's actually kind of a hero. If she had support, she would go after these guys. I happen to think that some of the people you're seeing now in the Trump administration wouldn't say they're that, but I actually think they're going to look at the concentrations of power in big tech. These people have started, Mike Davis and Rachel Bovard and Gail Slater all came from the kind of these small NGOs, not for profits, that focused on the too much concentration of power by the tech giants, and they were mocked and ridiculed by conservatives and the right for years, but they're not being mocked now. The other school is the Chicago school, which kind of looks at consumer pricing, and that's how you want to do it. And you get a lot of economics in there. So I don't believe in that. I've seen it. I don't think it gets to the case. I worked in Goldman and M&A for years and years and years in hostile takeovers, being the defender of companies that were having like the Mike Milkens of the world come after them. I see what concentrations of corporate power does and particularly when you have regulatory capture or regulatory merger. And it's very dangerous. Our model here in this country right now is much closer to the Chinese Communist Party than it is to the founders of our republic. I think we're in a very dangerous time of concentration of corporate power. And the progressive left may not see this, but the right definitely does. We saw what happened during COVID. We saw I was debanked. Had my credit cards canceled. President Trump also debanked, has credit cards canceled. So many of the leaders of our movement. So and corporate power got so woke. It's supposed to be so conservative and so Republican. It got so woke as to be offensive. So we're very, very. I am absolutely against big concentrations of corporate power, and I always think that corporations have to be reined in because I think not reined in, they could be quite dangerous, as I think they proved in COVID, and I think they proved in the DEI woke age of our country.
So, you talked about debanking, and Mark Andreessen went on Joe Rogan recently and talked about how his debanking and the debanking of people, which comes from places like billionaires, right? So PayPal can just kick you off. They could debank you, which they've done. Same thing with Patreon. Same thing with all of them. They can just debank you. You've been debanked. So, but Mark Andreessen made the case that was coming from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which they actually fight against that sort of thing. And so now Elon's going after. I think he's doing great work with USAID, and I'm all for his, auditing of the Pentagon and the Treasury Department. But he's pretending that Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is somehow a nefarious group, and they're actually the only thing in the government that's looking out for the regular worker, the regular Joe, and trying to protect them from things like debanking. And what do you say to that?
Well, first off, I think they're going to, the Doge guys are going after, they have a big mandate, a writ to go after all this. And we'll talk about in a second how it ties back to reality of the budgeting process. The consumer, which I think, look, the payday lending, there were some horrible abuses. I think there's arguments on both sides. One, does it actually restrict credit to people and what it's actually done to protect people? I do think there's arguments to keep parts of it. There's arguments to take down parts of it. they're going to go through and do an audit. All that eventually is going to have to come back through Congress. I think you're seeing this. They put a budget out today. That's a 10-year budget. It's a joke on the math, but it doesn't have any Doge elements in it. I mean, all this thing Doge is doing and saying they're going to get $1 trillion in cuts a year, which we need. I don't happen to think it's that much waste, fraud, and abuse. There is some. I think they've already found some. And there may be more incompetence than we even know. We need to get to the bottom of that and root it out. I do think that the only way you're going to get these budget deficits under control, and if you don't get them under control, you're not going to get inflation under control, is that you have to do major programmatic cuts. And I think those programmatic cuts have to start the Defense Department. You have to cross the Potomac and get into the Defense Department. Until you go to the Defense Department, and let's leave waste, fraud, and abuse aside and the fact they haven't been able to get an audit done in decades. I'm just talking programmatically, and particularly how it lines up with President Trump's kind of rethinking of our strategy, which is now a hemispheric strategy. He's kind of laying out that, and Rubio talked about this, the end of the post-war rules-based international order means that you don't need the United States from NATO to the Middle East to the Malacca Straits and South China Sea and then up to Korea and Japan. The United States doesn't need to be everywhere. We take care of this hemisphere from the Panama Canal to Greenland and kind of block the Russian Navy up there, which it will, and cut off the Chinese Navy to get into the Gulf of America from the Pacific. You have a kind of a Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You had Bolsonaro in Brazil, Milei in Argentina. You've secured the hemisphere. You add Canada, or even if you don't, you have some sort of partnership with Alaska. You got Alaska, Greenland, and you got Canada. You're at the Arctic, which is going to be the new great game of the 21st century between China, Russia, and the United States. My point is, you have a total hemispheric. You're totally hemispherically secured. You take the island chains in the Pacific, and you've secured the United States of America from any real attacks. You put an Iron Dome on it, anti-ballistic missile. I'm good to go. Then we're hermetically sealed, essentially, against the rest of the world. Not perfectly, but a lot more than we are today, which is about 2%. So you do that. Your priorities can change in defense. We can't spend right now. It's $900 billion, the NDA for defense, NDAA. And I will tell people it's really $1 trillion because they hide other costs everywhere. And the budget they put out today, they got There's a thing out with $170 billion additional for DHS, I think it is, for the invasion of the southern border, to seal the border, but to do the mass deportation, $175 billion. Think of that ticket. There's another $100 billion in defense added on to the $900 billion we're spending. We just can't do it. We're at 3.4, 3.5% of GDP on our defense spending, and it just can't continue. And I come at this from a guy that I was 7.5, 8 years as a naval officer, 3.5, 4 years at sea on a combatant on a destroyer back at the Pentagon. My daughter's a West Point grad. She served with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. So we're not doves. I'm kind of a hawk, but I consider myself rational in about how you go about this. And if we're serious about cutting this budget, we have to cross the Pentagon, or we have to cross the Potomac and start at the Pentagon.
And so that's what Panama and the Greenland was all about. So Panama was about getting Chinese out of the Panama Canal, and Greenland was about securing it from Russia.
So if you take, it's like Alfred Lord Mahan, the great theoretician that the British based their naval strategy on. It's if you take the Panama Canal and you block the ability of the Chinese and the Russian Navy ever to team up, and you go all the way up the East Coast of the thing, and you go Greenland can block the Russian Navy, particularly the submarines, the fast attack and the ballistic missile submarines from coming out of Murmansk and Archangel in the Arctic and coming down past Greenland and between Greenland and Iceland, right there in that slot. With the United States, you build a base right there. You put hunter-killer aircraft. You put fast attack submarines. You bottle them up. Right now, we have sonar buoys and sophisticated. There's also classified, but non-classified. The sonar buoys, you can track them and trail them. Here, you can bottle them up. You bottle up the Russian Navy, and you've secured the United States. You put an Iron Dome on it, and that's kind of expensive, and technologically we can't get there. But you've got the Monroe Doctrine 2.0. You've secured the southern border. Now you got this issue in the Arctic, because that's going to be this, like the great game was in Afghanistan in the 19th century. It's a great power struggle up there as China's up there. Russia's spending all their time and money up there. The Arctic is going to be and this is one of the reasons Canada has to take seriously some sort of partnership. President Trump wants a state, but some sort of partnership with the United States, because now their greatest barrier, the Arctic North, is now their softest underbelly of exposure to a great power struggle, where the United States having Alaska and some sort of partnership with Greenland, which I think we will get. You add Canada and we can just block it up there. So it's a naval strategy. This is why when President Trump announced it, he's thought this thing through, I think, pretty well. The NATO countries, I said at the time, weeks ago, I said they better take the signal here, not the noise, because we're telling them the Russian army's your problem. We're not a continental power. We bailed you out in World War I. We came back and bailed you out again in World War II. We bailed you out again in the Cold War. We're done. The Ukraine thing's a disaster. We never should have been involved. We're done. The Russian army's your problem. And Pete Hegseth said today, I think in Munich, at the security conference, he says, hey, Europe's got to understand European defense security is not a high priority for the United States. They're an ally. We don't want to be a protectorate or a vassal state. So we can get to it, but it's not a high priority. A high priority is securing the homeland. And President Trump is laying out a pretty serious plan. I will also tell your listeners, he's not kidding. He's not trolling people. When he talks about the Panama Canal, the Chinese Communist Party came down there and bought off the elites like they do. It's predatory capitalism. They had all the things in Chinese. The people were getting screwed. The people down there want us back. President Trump's going to take back the Panama Canal. That no doubt. And the Chinese Navy is not going to be sailing through there. The Greenland situation, he's absolutely serious in this. He talked about this in the first term. In fact, I think he had Ron Lauder, the executive, try to work a deal the first time with the Danes. So he's very serious about it. He's talked about this ever since I've known him. He's been obsessed with Greenland, and particularly naval warfare, and using a naval strategy to protect the United States of America, which is we were a naval power in World War II. Canada, he's very serious about that. If you look at geoeconomically and the tariffs we announced yesterday on the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, that's just part one. He looks at the United States as a premium market that the little guy is kind of supported and built over time. And he looks at it like you would look at buying a box at a sporting event or a front row ticket in a concert. It's a premium market. You got to pay a premium price. He doesn't look at tariffs like a 25% tariff on a Mexican avocado. That's an old way of thinking. Number one, he thinks it's a premium market. You should pay for that privilege to get in here. And the only way you don't pay is you put your manufacturing right here and you hire American citizens for those jobs. I think that's pretty revolutionary. This is why this concept of external revenue, he keeps talking about McKinley. Hamilton was called the American Plan. The founders of our nation, who are protectionists like Hamilton, had this plan called the American System or the American Plan, with very high protective tariffs to make sure that our manufacturing base could start to grow. And up until the financial crisis of 1907, when shortly thereafter we went to the Internal Revenue Service and really put all the revenue generation to run the government on corporations and or American citizens. Up until then, everything was essentially paid for by tariffs, fees, and duties. And this is why he keeps talking about McKinley. It's one of the reasons he renamed Mount Denali Mount McKinley, because he's a big fan of McKinley's. And he looks at this budget deficit, when you're talking $2 trillion, in President Trump's mind, he sees $1 trillion. Now, maybe a grossly ambitious number, but he sees $1 trillion coming in annually as external revenue from people trying to get into this market, or putting manufacturing here where we're getting the benefits of that manufacturing to lower the deficit. And people should know that he's not trolling people. He's very serious about Canada, very serious about Greenland. He's very serious about the Panama Canal.
Well, I mean, I've seen stories about companies in Canada already, when he was threatening the tariff, that they were going to open up manufacturing in the United States because of it. So that just kind of bolsters what you're saying about it. There's so many things. I'd love to talk to you for an hour about the tariff deal, but I got to move on. You're not afraid that those tariffs will cause inflation?
Well, look, in 18 and 19, we put the highest tariffs we've ever had on China, and prices came down. No, I don't think so. I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
I'm always worried about it, but I think you look at the empirical evidence we've had before that it doesn't. My fears of inflation are, and I have strong fears of inflation. If you watch our show today, kind of highlighted with with the increase in inflation, and because it comes from too much money being printed. It's this massive government spending, and here's the reason: people for years said, "Well, debt doesn't matter, deficits don't matter because it never affects the working class person."
It deflates the value of the dollar.
Thank you. It destroys the purchasing power of the dollar. The reverse of that's inflation, and this is where we are. And now people, I think, getting now, Jimmy. Here's where we're in a terrible position. Since we have $36 or $37 trillion face amount of national debt, contingent liabilities on the dollar are over $100 trillion net present value. Let's put that aside. But the face amount is that basically a third of that has to be refinanced every year. I think Scott Bessent right now, as Treasury Secretary, has, I don't know, $7 or $9 trillion of government securities he's got to sell. And if you look at the 10-year Treasury, if you start doing this at higher prices, that gets embedded. That financing cost gets embedded into life. I believe right now in this budget, if you look at it, the gross interest expense, not the net, but the gross interest expense, I think, is $1.3 or $1.4 trillion. If that's not the number directionally, it's higher than the defense budget. The debt of our country is one of the leading, if not the leading, national security issue for the nation because we don't have the flexibility, the range of flexibility. Back for your audience that's old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo and then the inflation that exploded. We paid the price for guns and butter in Vietnam. In the late 80s 70s and destroyed Jimmy Carter when Reagan came in with Volcker. And remember, interest rates, I think, were like 17%. They had to wring that out of it. The United States at the time, we were a manufacturing superpower. We had virtually no debt or very little debt. We had a clean balance sheet. Our working force, our blue collar working force, was probably the most educated in the world because of the greatness of the American public school system and the Catholic school system. We were a different country. Today, we're not that country. So we're in a financial crisis, and our options and range of alternatives are narrowing every day. That's why 2 weeks ago or last week, when Doge started and the OMB guys just sent out a memo that said, hey, look, we're just taking over here. We just want to put a temporary pause on all money going anywhere because we want to see where this $5 trillion is in the system. MSNBC and people had a meltdown. And that's just talking about where the money is in the system. Think about when you have to start cutting. If we have to cut $1 trillion a year of this deficit and a couple of $100 billion comes out of defense, and you got to take $400 or $500 billion out of social programs or maybe Medicaid, you're going to have riots in the streets. And this is why I say people think the hardest days of Trump's administration, and you got all these people running around, everybody's loving Trump, right? They all love him. You're like the bros loving. You have the converging pincer moves of massive cuts in federal spending that you're going to have to do, coupled with the deportation of 10 million illegal alien invaders. You tell me what that's going to look like in this country. It's going to be both of them have to be done, and you got to be empathetic in doing it, but they're going to be hard, and it's going to be tough, and it's going to be quite contentious.
Well, here's what I don't understand. So I'm a small business owner, and I see how much money I have to pay to these vampires, which are called health insurance companies, who make money by skimming. They don't provide you with care. They skim, and then they make even more money by denying care that you paid for. And so we've got, almost a quarter of our economy going to healthcare. Why don't we have a more intelligent plan? We pay twice as much as the rest of the Western world for way worse outcomes. We have worse outcomes than Cuba. So why doesn't somebody tackle that problem? Why do I have to? I have one employee. I have to spend $40,000 a year for him and his family on health care. Why aren't business owners screaming about, hey, why don't we get rid of this healthcare burden around our neck? We could cut our healthcare costs in half and give everybody healthcare. Everybody who's on Medicare can't wait to get to it. It's the most popular healthcare program in the country. Why, we have Luigi Mangione and people cheering for him. Why are there no business owners wanting to get this albatross off around their neck? And so we can have a healthcare system like the rest of the Western world has figured out a long time ago.
I think there are a lot of business owners that actually are screaming for this. I think the reality is, and this is why Bobby Kennedy later tonight should be confirmed as the Secretary of HHS. And I've been the biggest proponent of Bobby from the beginning. I actually was an early advocate of Bobby Kennedy being President Trump's vice president, because it's the merger. Kennedy is the manifestation of the Make America Healthy Again movement, and the merger of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, Nicole Shanahan, Naomi Wolf, the Moms for Liberty, all these red-pilled moms, with MAGA, is a 1932 type realignment in American politics where we can govern for decades and decades and decades if we do that, if we merge these two together. I had Tuberville on before the hearings with Bobby, and you saw how vicious the hearings got at Bobby. And I said, look, Senator Tuberville, if you had to rank the military-industrial complex, the big tech industrial complex, and the biopharmaceutical medical complex, as far as power in the imperial capital, where were they rank? And he laughed at me. He says, Steve, he says, the biopharmaceutical medical is at the top. And he says, if you combined the military industrial and the big tech, he says, which are both enormously powerful, if you added them together and doubled them, you would not have the power of that lobby. In fact, he said, the reason Bobby Kennedy on the Committee of Jurisdiction, which is one that runs the hearing. Remember, Bobby Kennedy, the first day went to the Finance Committee. The second day he went to see Tuberville and these guys on the Health and Human Services Committee. And the reason is the Health and Human Services guy reports to the Finance Committee. Why? Because Medicaid and Medicare are multi-trillion-dollar combined entities. There's so much cash flows through DC. It's a lot. The insurance companies, the big medical providers, pharma, they have a lock on this town. If you wanted to come up with your idea, you just said, hey, Steve, I got this idea. Let's get some entrepreneurs. We get, 50 entrepreneurs. They give you some money and they want you to be like a trade association or something. You can't find, Jimmy, you could run around DC. You can't find competent lawyers really that you could retain. They've all been retained. They all work as lobbyists. They're all retained by the big pharma, the big medical, the medical industrial complex. You can't find them. The lobbyists, the law firms, the comm shops. This is why, look at MSNBC. It's one of the first things Bobby wants to do. If you took off big pharma's advertising out of MSNBC, it would be a test pattern. I think 75% of their ads in prime time come from big pharma. I mean, we monitor it nonstop, and the diseases these people have is like bizarre.
Yeah.
But big pharma runs this town. So it's not my line of country. I depend on the Bobby Kennedys of the world to think that through because it's so complex. But I know there's many alternatives. I know Bobby's got a lot of things he's thinking of. And the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, President Trump's going to have its back. And I think you're going to see some amazing things, but they're going to be huge fights. Well, everything's going to be incremental. And so I would just tell folks to, get more information and back the guys like Bobby Kennedy that are here. And if he gets approved tonight, it's historic. Tulsi and Bobby were heavy lifts. I mean, our audience was nonstop on the phones, on email, calling congressmen, sending text messages over the last 4 or 5 weeks to make sure these guys got in here.
So I just don't understand why we don't start the insurance pool at the Atlantic and end it at Hawaii. That's how you lower the costs. That's how you start, and you get the middleman out. And, Trump's a ball buster and he's a bull in a china shop, and he could get that done if he wanted to. But there just isn't any will. Even Bobby Kennedy's not for Medicare for all. He's not for that idea of starting the insurance pool at the Atlantic and ending it at Hawaii, that's the only way to solve this. And we could solve it. It's not a Rubik's Cube. We know how the rest of the world does it. We know we spend twice as much. It's crazy. It's what over 100 million Americans have medical debt. It's the craziest system, and Trump is supposed to be the guy breaking those strangleholds on our government, and along with Elon, but it doesn't seem like he has any interest in doing this. But I have to move on, and so Trump said yesterday, I think, that he wants details provided about his 2 assassination attempts. President Trump said he wants the Secret Service to provide him with information about the 2 attempts on his life last year, including details about both suspects, Ryan Routh and Thomas Matthew Crooks. I'm entitled to know. I want to find out about the 2 assassins. Why did the one guy have 6 cell phones, and why did the other guy have foreign apps? Ruth had multiple cellular phones in his car. And regarding the apps, Trump was referencing to reports citing anonymous sources that Crook's phone had foreign encrypted apps on it. The president alleged that the information related to the attempts was withheld by Joe Biden's administration. No more holding back because of Biden. I'm entitled to know. And they held it back long enough. Trump told newspapers, no excuses. So, by the way, authorities have released few details about Crooks to the public, and Crooks' family has not released a statement since the assassination attempt. No motive for the shooting has been publicly established. So, who do you think tried to kill Trump? I thought it was the globalists and the deep state that didn't want to end the Ukraine war, because as Julian Assange taught us, those wars are not meant to be won. They're meant to be ongoing because it's one big money grift. It's a money funneling. The Ukraine war is that's why they didn't want any oversight on any of the money sent there. And now Zelensky's saying he doesn't know where $100 billion went and he wants more money. And so who do you think was trying to kill Trump? And why aren't they still trying? So just let me ask you that. Who do you think was trying to kill Trump?
I think who trying to kill Trump. I warned the president about this a year before. I said it publicly when Robert Kagan. It's out in plain sight. Robert Kagan is the public intellectual. I think he's over at the Atlantic now. He's the husband of Victoria Nuland, who's the architect of the color revolution in Ukraine. So Kagan's one of the biggest public intellectuals we have. I think it's in January 1st, 23 or 24. He does a 5,000-word essay in the Washington Post on New Year's Day. It talks about Trump as Caesar and kind of makes the case that we're looking for a Brutus, that Brutus is, would be a hero. It goes back to the first term of President Trump. Remember the Public Theater in New York, out there in Shakespeare in the Park. They had to play Julius Caesar, and Caesar was dressed as Trump. He had the blue suit, the red tie, the yellow hair. Portia is Melania. I mean, it was subtle. It was up in your face. And people, the elite in New York, gave a standing ovation every night when the assassins, the senators, assassinate Trump. They have a standing ovation. The elites in this country. That's who killed him. That's who tried to kill him. I warned him. I said, Kagan is the Washington Post is the hometown paper for the imperial capital. I said they basically gave moral justification. They're looking for their Brutus. Every night on TV, how Trump's a dictator, Trump's awful, this poison that was put out there every single day. Who tried to kill him? The apparatus did. Okay? Now they got some assassins, just like, the Lee Harvey Oswalds, the chumps you get that could be the front man, if he was even the front man. But my point is, you've got the kid in Pennsylvania and this goofball from doing the Ukraine work down the golf course in Palm Beach.
So Steve,
no, the deep. It's not even a deep state. I don't even call it a deep state. It's up in your face when you're sitting there. Like President Trump put me in charge in the first year of with Eric Prince of trying to get us out of Afghanistan. And they'll sit there. They will. And look, I came out of the Pentagon. I worked there as a junior officer. I was a Grundoon back in President Reagan's first term, 1981 to 1983. And these folks today, they'll sit right there in a briefing and look you in the eye and lie to you, a bald-faced lie. The system has its own way they're going to roll. They don't care if it's Bernie Sanders or AOC or Donald Trump or whoever. They got their own way they're going to roll. And the way they're going to roll, it's an imperial power. They're like a Praetorian Guard. They will pick and choose who kind of the front man is, like of Joe Biden. And we now know that Biden was selected. We now know that Biden really have charge of it. That has to be as serious investigation as anything we've done in history. That Pam Bondi's got to get on top of that. I think a special prosecutor ought to be on top of that. Everything from the stolen 2020 election to J6 to the vast criminal conspiracy to trying to lock President Trump up to who ran the White House. And when did they really know that he had dementia or he couldn't do it? Now they're all coming out clear. Oh yeah, I knew her numbers. I knew she was going to lose. I knew the numbers weren't there, or I knew he had dementia. That's all lies. Up until 10 or 11 o'clock that night, you didn't hear any of these people saying that. They weren't saying it at all. That night before, in the morning of, they're sitting there talking and how Kamala's going to win, the university's going to turn out, the urban areas are going to turn out. Joe Biden. Joe Biden's there to support her. Right, all of you never heard any of this until Trump blew her out, and so that all has to be investigated. But I think it's very dear. This is why what Elon's doing, and I don't agree with Elon on a lot of stuff, but this kind of armor-piercing shell that is Doge, right? That is Doge is getting to the heart, I think, of a lot of things in the administrative state. The next thing it has to do is the deep state. When I say the deep state, that's this interlocking between parts of the Defense Department, parts of the FBI, parts of the Justice Department, parts of DHS, parts of CIA, and other elements in DNI. Those interlocking groups have this kind of permanent Praetorian Guard that they run the American empire. They run the hegemon.
And so why
like
did they?
I said, as soon as Afghanistan and Iraq's over, they'll figure out how to get you in Ukraine, and that'll be the next money. That'll be the next cash cow until they figure out something else.
And so that's so exactly. So why, if so, they had 5,000 FBI agents trying to dismantle MAGA, right? They had 92 felony indictments against Donald Trump. They did all the, and a lot of people say that the 2020 election was not on the up and up. So why would the FBI go from having 5,000 people trying to dismantle MAGA and all the lawfare against Donald Trump? Why would they just roll over and allow him to become president? Why would the deep state allow? That's the part I can't understand. Why would they allow him to become president?
Well, they try to think about it. They tried every lawsuit, put him in, 92 indictments on many different locations, run up time and money, and the agony and the kind of anxiety you have. Then when he got momentum and he defeated Biden, they tried to take him out physically with an assassination. How does a kid get 8 rounds off? How does he get 8 rounds off for the Secret Service? That guys take him out. It's impossible. From 150 yards away. The places, when I was in the White House, the Secret Service, you're hermetically sealed. And you got drones all over the place. You got a command center. It's just inconceivable that was not an inside job. It's just inconceivable. Just knowing what the
no doubt
how the apparatus is. So how did they do it? They underestimated. They didn't realize that we could dig out these kind of votes. It was divine providence. Look, I was there in 2016. It was divine. That was a providential win. We had a man, we had a plane, we had a message, a mission, and Hillary Clinton as our opponent. And we pulled that out at the very 11th hour. That went down to the wire. President Trump wanted, remember, I thought I did a great job in 2016. We got 63.5 million votes. In 2020, the brother got 74 million votes. And I know the politics of this country pretty well. And I go, wow, where did he pick up another almost 11 million votes? It's amazing. So, but it was providential also that we had that stolen, because I don't think people in this country, this is why so many people that were formerly on the left and people who are formerly hard right are now talking together. This is why Bobby Kennedy's getting approved in Trump's cabinet tonight. This is why Tulsi Gabbard, a progressive congressman, is now head of DNI. This is why you're seeing more and more populists, people like Fetterman that we can work with, people like Ro Khanna that we could work with. You're seeing a whole new reevaluation of politics. Nicole Shanahan, who's a super progressive out in Silicon Valley, is now one of the leaders of the Make America Healthy Again. You're seeing a reformulation and kind of this fourth turning of American politics. We caught them unaware. Also, remember, history shows you when you control the levers of power, you get lazy. This is why did the French Revolution, why did they collapse so quickly? They had every part of power, and all of a sudden they were gone. Because if you go back and study it, they just got lazy. They got cocky. They got arrogant. They just think it's Bannon and Trump and these fucking clowns. We don't need to pay attention of them. So they got Elon Musk dancing around in Pennsylvania. We're not worried about it. We'll shut it down. We'll figure out how to shut this thing down. And guess what? It didn't happen. And that came from years of people working, little guys, not just the precinct strategy to have Trump's back and rebuild and get little victories so we could get some momentum, but it also the hundreds of thousands of people that we trained up on election fraud. There was not a counting table in this country that didn't have MAGA people in there counting those votes this time. We were fully trained up and 100%, basically 100% full. That was a grassroots outpouring for Trump. And look, the deep state, but they're far from finished. Don't think they're just going to sit there. They didn't toss us the keys in 2016. They haven't really tossed us the keys right now. That's why you're seeing such high drama in DC, and that's why I think Elon Musk particularly upsets him about some of the stuff he's got these young Doge guys doing in these different departments and agencies. And Elon, I think, would be the first to admit he hasn't gotten into the deep state part of it. That's why I keep saying, hey, brother, I'm glad you're doing education. I'm glad. Look, USAID has been something that people worked on for years. That's a slush fund for the CIA and a slush fund for nefarious activities. People have known that. But to get into the CIA, to get into DNI, to really get into the defense program. Unless you go cross the Potomac and are prepared to confront the Pentagon, the Mac Daddy of control of this country, you're kidding yourself. So that's why I hope Elon in the next couple of days actually crosses the Potomac and gets into it, because we need those cuts. We need the budget cuts, and I think that's the beginning of piercing what I call the deep state.
I mean, I 100% agree with that. I just think that it puts Trump in a lot of peril to do that. I hope he does, though. But I have to, before I let you go.
Hold on, you mean peril about potential assassinations now in the White House? I would agree with you.
Yeah,
I tell President, I am always concerned about his security, and I'm concerned about his security, the internal security. I'm security because, look, if they take out President Trump, I mean, he's, and I know this drives people nuts, but you have General Washington, you have Lincoln, and then you have Trump. This will be known as the age of Trump. When this whole thing's 100 years from now, they won't remember Elon Musk or Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Jimmy Dore. They'll remember Trump, and they'll remember MAGA, this populist movement that came out around this guy. And he's unique. This country generates people like this every 100 years. And, and I realize a lot of people hate him, but I will tell you, a lot of people hated Lincoln. And a lot of people hated Washington. You go back and they were on Washington all the times. Those great leaders are disruptors, like FDR and Reagan. During the time they're enormously controversial. It's only later, after they've powered through things, right, that they've become an armor-piercing shell to the system, or they've given the system blunt force trauma. Only later, as the country's gone to the next level, in the kind of looking back in history, are they looked at as kind of unifiers. At the time, Lincoln was not a unifier at all. Washington, to a large extent, was not a unifier. Remember, only about a third of the country actually fought in the Revolution. And General Washington's great claim, besides what he did as president, his greatest claim was a general field commander for 8 years in a ragtag army to hold that together against a third of the country that were Tories and a third of the country who didn't give a fuck, were going to play both sides against the middle. He was a disruptor. Lincoln's a disruptor. Trump's a disruptor. In history, we look at General Washington as the father of our country. We look at Lincoln as the second American Revolution that really gave us a new republic, right? Without indentured servitude or the bonds of slavery. And we're going to look at Trump as the same way. He's taken this country if he makes it through. But I'm concerned. I agree with you. I'm always concerned about his health and his safety.
So, but my last thing, I got to ask you this, because this is I think this is going to be the Achilles heel of his administration, is Israel policy. So he said this just yesterday. Let me play it for you.
Said that process would take 10 to 15 years. Does your commitment to rebuilding Gaza extend beyond your time in office?
I'm committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices. But we're committed to owning it, taking it, and making sure that Hamas doesn't move back. There's nothing to move back into. The place is a demolition.
So there's nobody to buy it from, A, and B, that's not America first. Here's what he said after he got off the plane.
As far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock, and after that, I would say all hell is going to break out. And I don't think they're going to do it. I think a lot of them are dead. I think a lot of the hostages are dead. I think it's a great human tragedy.
So that's Trump ending the ceasefire deal. They have a deal, and Israel fails to meet every single part of the ceasefire deal. Trump says if Hamas doesn't meet their end of the deal, all hell will break loose by 12 p.m. Saturday. They have met their end of the deal, and that's even according to the Israeli government. The intention is to create the impossible situation within which Palestinians can only die or... But just to back up what I said, Israel's mass circulation newspaper, the Israeli army and security establishment, confirmed that so far Hamas has not violated the ceasefire deal. And so the deal was that they were going to do that. They were going to release 4 hostages, 3 That was the whole deal. Trump is now blowing that deal up, and he's breaking the ceasefire. What do you, first of all, that I haven't really found anybody who's serious who thinks his plan about taking over Gaza, rebuilding it, and kicking out the Palestinians is going to work. There's just as many Hamas fighters today as there was on October 7th, and Israel is the one who breaks every one of the ceasefire deals. So what do you say? What do you see as a, do you think his plan is going to work? Do you think it's thought out? It doesn't seem thought out. And what do you think will be the solution? My solution is that Trump gets tough with Netanyahu, says, "Hey, you better start being a good neighbor to the people in the Middle East, and we're going to withdraw all our funding, and you're on your own. Because if we left them, that country would collapse." So he's got all the hand, he's got all the power. He doesn't seem to want to use it in this situation. I'll throw it to you. What do you say?
I say that I think that particularly when we look at the Ottoman Empire, the Caliphate, they're going to go to try to control the two holy sites. And whether Israel's there or not, it's going to start a kinetic part of a third world war. And I think we have to be very smart at how we play. I believe in what President Trump's, I think, saying is that, because it's outside the box, is saying, hey, look, I'm tired of just doing this tick for tack. I want to look at something totally different, which is, hey, we're gonna redevelop this, and we're gonna do it in a big way and make it a world city or whatever. Do I think it's thought through? Not totally. Do I think he has a lot of support in this? Not a lot. But he's got guys like Witkoff and others, and Jared, I think, have thought through part of this with him. All I know about Trump is that he changes the conversation. What we're doing there and what we're doing in Gaza is not working. Maybe we try something else. And this point about the ceasefire, the Muslim Brotherhood are rearming and refinancing the entire time. Now, I believe right before we came on here, I think they said the 12 noon thing is off, that they've agreed, that Hamas and Israel, I think, have agreed to go back to the 3 or 4 hostages and not have a high noon, tripwire.
I mean, that was the deal that Witkoff.
When President Trump said it, I said, we better be ready to get engaged there, because that's going to light the place up. And I think it's a very dangerous place to light up.
So if he sends American troops, I mean, the only way
No, impossible. No, impossible.
That's not going to happen?
No. There will not be American troops. I don't believe that President Trump, he's getting a lot of pressure for this. I don't believe President Trump even supports a military, any type of military support for either an air attack into Persia or any type of ground attack into Persia by the Israelis. I think Netanyahu came over to talk about that. I think that's one of the reasons President Trump started talking about Gaza, kind of changed the conversation. I think the conversation Netanyahu wanted and was going to spend the time on is actually their movement of either taking out wherever this nuclear facility is, or the potential nuclear facility, either through an airstrike where they would need American air logistics support, or something on support on the ground, which I do oppose. I don't think we should get involved in that. And I don't think the Israelis should do it. They would. It would light off the region into a.
We've been in the Middle East, Iraq, Libya, Syria. It's all in part or wholly because of Israel. So I just think that,
Hold it. Hang on. I was, as a young naval officer in my 20s, I was on a destroyer in the North Arabian Sea in the Persian Gulf. And I think 1979, when the Persians took our hostages, that wasn't driven specifically by Israel. That was driven by a takeover of, Islamic State coming. Now, they hated Israel. But I think to blame it on Israel is they hate the Judeo-Christian West. You have to understand, Jimmy, they hate us. Is Israel there? And do they have a lot of problems with Israel? And has Israel sometimes not been the best neighbor to these people? Maybe, but that's not the issue. The issue is the Judeo-Christian West. They hate us. We're the great Satan. This comes from, I'm over there in 79 and my daughter's over there in 2010 with the 101st. That's a long swath that we've been there. And I agree. The war in Iraq was a disaster. The war in Afghanistan was a disaster. And I'm a huge believer of, that's why the hemispheric defense of here is so important. You get the hemispheric defense, then we can pick and choose. Then if we want to, and I think we have to defend Taiwan against the CCP because of the chips. You can pick and choose. I think, and I'm a big supporter of being an ally of Israel, but I don't want to get drawn into any more Middle Eastern wars because of this. And I think Trump's the guy that can keep us out. Remember, he's the last guy anybody wants to get in a shooting war with. We had no war in Ukraine. We had no war in the Middle East. Now we've got, President Trump said today, we have 1.5 million casualties in Ukraine. 1 million dead Ukrainians or wounded Ukrainians, 500 to 700,000 dead or wounded Russians, a place that looks like Dresden in 1945. The same in Israel, that would have never happened. Gaza looks like Dresden. It would have never happened if Trump was there. So if it never happened on Trump's watch, I have a lot of faith that this guy's the kind of guy who can bang some heads and make something happen. And every now and again, he's going to throw you a curveball like, hey, we're going to turn Gaza into beachfront property. And, it's just like, hey, let the guy roll. Let's see what happens.
All right. Well, just to, that the hostage taking in Iran was as a result of us overthrowing Mossadegh in 1953,
Yes.
installing a puppet who was an
Yes.
oppressive leader, and that's called blowback. And so that was the blow. And we didn't go to war with Iran. We went to war with Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan for 20 years, and it was all big money funneling operations.
I agree.
Okay.
It's a disgrace. I agree with that 100%. So we got to get out.
Okay.
But we can't. I'm a strong believer we can't abandon Israel. I know and I'll tell people, I tell the Israelis this, I said, look, there's a rising tide of some of the smartest people in our movement. Tucker Carlson, Kurt Mills, others. I mean, really smart, dedicated people that are, saying, hey, we got too much involvement there. We're too close to the Israelis. We have to look a different way. And I keep telling people the old fallback position that traditional Catholics or evangelical Christians are going to have, and this is why I think they've got Huckabee as the ambassador, that old fallback position, I don't think exists anymore. And I think Israel's got to do a much better job of presenting its case to the American people.
Steve Bannon, host of the War Room, I really appreciate you making time for us today. Thanks. It's been great. I'd love to have you back whenever you're available.
I'm a big fan of the show and your comedy. So anytime you want to, Jimmy, I'm honored to be on here. So you just let me know when.
Okay. You're a wealth of information. I could talk to you all day. Steve Bannon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks.